Hey y'all, it's Jen. Hope you're having a good Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. Today, I wanted to touch on the topic of IDs, identification, specifically Kansas identification. Working with those experiencing homelessness, one of the biggest barriers that we've come across is most of the folks don't have a form of identification. Either they have lost it or it's been stolen or whatever has happened. They are needing some form of identification. And so, one thing that I work on a lot with folks is getting them that Kansas ID card. Now, in the process of doing this, we kind of go through the regular questions that we're all trained to go through. Do you have a birth certificate, a certified birth certificate? Because we've all been trained that to get an ID, you have to have a certified birth certificate. In a lot of cases, this is true, but not in all cases. Another question we always ask when trying to help somebody get an ID is, do you have a social security card? Again, we've been trained that you cannot get a Kansas ID without a social security card. In some cases, that's true, but not in all cases. Another question we always ask is, do you have a piece of mail, or actually two pieces of mail, to verify your address? Because it is a requirement that you provide two pieces of mail to get an ID. I always hate that question, especially when I'm working with a client who's experiencing homelessness. I mean, when I have to ask them to validate or verify their address and they don't have an address to verify, it sometimes feel like I'm like throwing mud in somebody's face. Hate that. But again, we work with other agencies that have their systems. And we're not always going to change those agency systems. Doesn't mean we don't have conversations with them about their systems, but we're not always going to change them. So, part of being a good case manager is learning how to work around them or through them, or I just sometimes call it navigating the systems and figure out the workaround. So, like I said, in most cases, someone who is needing a Kansas ID will need a certified birth certificate, social security card, and also those two proofs of address. But I also said, not in all cases. So during my work with this population, I had the privilege of making a wonderful contact with a person that works with the Kansas Department of Revenue here in the Johnson County area. She is awesome. I'm not going to give you her name because it's my little secret. But anyway, so she is awesome, and she has kind of educated me on better ways to work through the system so that I can help folks determine if they really need all those documents to get their ID. So, what I found out is that a lot of times my clients have had an ID, it's just been lost. ID might not be expired, they just need a replacement. So when it comes to a replacement ID, as long as it's not expired, you actually are not required to necessarily have to have a certified birth certificate, social security card, and the only thing you'll need is that validation of an address. Doesn't have to be a piece of mail though. It could be just a face sheet or a medical record from an agency. If someone is on probation or parole, a certificate of ID can be used. Also, if they're receiving case management services through Johnson County Mental Health, a face sheet can actually be used that shows an address on it where the identification can be mailed to, as well as the address that can be placed on the identification card. So again, what I always do is I talk to my folks. I find out what kind of documentation can we get. Can we get a shelter letter, a shelter face sheet that is from a shelter that verifies their identity? It's again another community agency that they're working with that can provide a letter, or a face sheet or a client sheet, we call them like that too, that can verify and prove their identity. As long as that client sheet is from an agency that is providing some type of service to this client, and that face sheet has their name and their date of birth and their address on it, then that can be used as a proof of address. So when I was working street outreach with the mental health center, a lot of times what I did was I would just go ahead and create that face sheet. And, and then I would go in with the client, and that would be what they needed. If all they were needing was a replacement ID, which again, a lot of our folks just need replacements, then we go in that with that face sheet, we go in with the $7, and we go ahead and get the ID. So my suggestion for all of y'all that are working with someone in Kansas, Johnson County area, pretty much this is the truth throughout all of Kansas, is to, before you start trying to work on getting birth certificates and social security cards, call the local driver's license bureau or Kansas Department of Revenue driver's license office in Johnson County. You can just call them with your client, have your client give them their name and their date of birth, and they can look up their record and tell you right then and there the status of their ID, if it is expired, if it is just a replacement, or if they're starting all over again. And they'll tell them right then and there what documentations they actually need to be able to get that replacement. Again, this is a great tip because I have learned that you can save a lot of time and energy, and also that, trying to bend over backwards looking for resources to pay for a birth certificate and a social security card is free, but we'll go on that on another video. But trying to pay for a birth certificate when really you might not need one, because once you get that ID, you can go ahead and use that to get the social security card. So that's my tip for the day. If you have any questions or want any more information on that, please post at the bottom of this video, send me an email or whatever you want, and we can kind of go over that process a little bit more. On this post, I'm going to go ahead and also include the local numbers. I'm also going to include KCK's driver's license bureau's number too, but the local numbers of all the driver's license bureaus here in the Johnson County area that you can help your client call to get that information to see what exactly do they need to get their ID replaced. Thanks.